So, good afternoon, dear ladies and gentlemen. My name is Elias Grampas, and on behalf of the European Parliament Intergroup on Climate Change, Biodiversity and Sustainable Development, I'm delighted to welcome you all to today's webinar, where we'll be addressing methane emissions via the energy system integration and hydrogen strategies. Before we kick off, I would just like to take the opportunity to thank hosting MEP Ms. Spyraki for taking the lead with regards to today's event, as well as the Environmental Defense Fund for kindly co-organizing this webinar. Prior to passing the floor, I would also like to invite our audience to send us your questions via the Q&As box. You can choose the all panelists option during the event. Please also make sure to indicate the speaker to whom your question is best addressed so that we can facilitate a fruitful discussion to follow. Once again, thank you very much for joining our event today. And without further ado, Ms. Spyraki, you have the floor. Thank you very much. Ms. Spyraki, I'm sorry, your microphone is just muted.
I think now it's working. Thank you very much once again for organizing this event and for being here with us. As you all know, in 30 years, we will have to fundamentally transform our energy system and our economy in order to meet 2050 targets. Regarding the energy sector, it is deemed necessary to adapt in order to meet our climate goals, creating a different and more sustainable energy system. As 75% of EU emissions coming from the energy sector, it will be central to achieving zero world emission. Gas market reform is vital to achieving climate neutrality and fulfilling the objectives laid out in the EU strategy on energy system integration and hydrogen. Whilst European institutions and national governments have rightfully recognized the potential to reduce CO2 emissions in the gas sector, methane emissions remain overlooked. As you all know, methane is a greenhouse gas emission 84 times more potent than carbon dioxide over a 20-year time period. And the emissions from EU's oil and gas industry have a short-term climate impact equivalent to the annual CO2 emissions from 30 coal-fired power plants like the one that we have in West Macedonia. Because of its high global warming potential, methane is considered a priority under the European Green Deal. In order to reach Europe's 2030 climate goal of reducing emissions at least 55% according to the proposal of the Commission, and we're waiting of the outcome of the conclusions of the summit during December in order to proceed with the climate law, we would need to reduce methane by 1/3. And although agriculture, in particular cattle farming, is the single biggest emitter for methane, it is the energy sector that we can cut them fastest and cheapest. The European Commission has opted for a holistic approach to address the global warming impact of methane, putting the emphasis on international cooperation first, before forward regulating emissions in sectors like energy and agriculture next year. Therefore, the Commission methane strategy, which has been published on October 14, shies away from imposing immediate measures forcing energy companies to detect and repair methane leaks along the oil and gas supply chain, even though those are the easiest to tackle. The most cost-effective methane emission savings can be achieved in the energy sector. Upstream oil and gas operations generally have a variety of mitigation options that have no net costs or near zero costs. Major oil and gas companies, and I would like to insist on this because it is important to have some kind of best practices when it comes to the market, have already set targets to reduce methane emissions intensity. Shell gas, for example, called on EU policymakers to set strong methane regulation to repair leaks and cut emissions. It is Shell because 62 major oil and gas companies on Monday, 23 of November, agreed to a new framework for monitoring, reporting and reducing methane emissions as part of the oil and gas methane partnership number 2. The new tracking and disclosure system has been held as the gold standard for the industry, introducing a kind of voluntary comprehensive measure-based methane reporting framework that it will make it easier to accurately track and compare the performance of companies. This will be the basis for robust standards in Europe and beyond, and ensure the oil industry takes the practical actions urgently needed for our climate. A clear commitment to measure and monitor emissions is an important first step for significantly reducing them. That's why the European Union, is part of the partnership introducing the framework alongside the United Nations, the European Defence Council, and private companies with assets on continents representing 30% of the world's oil and gas production. On 2021, the Commission plans, as I have already to put forward a legislative proposal on compulsory measures, reporting and verification for all energy-related methane emissions, building on the framework set out under the partnership. Yet the Commission says it would be too early to enforce legally binding measures at the moment. I think this is something which is open, and I think that it is something that we have to touch upon during the discussion. Instead, the Commission said it will seek to make methane emissions reporting and verification more systematic at the UN level at the very first step, in order to pave the way for regulation to start applying at the latter stage. According to the International Energy Agency, around three-quarters of methane emissions could be reduced with existing technologies, and close to half could be done at net zero cost. In view of the above, the discussion in the methane strategy are involving in parallel two strategies. First, it is how can we reform the EU gas market design. It is called the EU strategy for energy system integration. And second, it is involving also a hydrogen strategy for a climate neutral Europe strategy published by the EU Commission earlier this year. According to the first, the EU strategy for energy system integration, investments in energy infrastructure typically have an economic life of 20 to 60 years. The steps taken in next 5 to 10 years will be crucial for building an energy system that drives Europe towards climate neutrality in 2050. It is worth reflecting on how the next investments in the energy sector could embrace the need to address and reduce methane emission, and it is quite important. System integration implies a full rethinking of the role of the gas in the EU, which currently accounts for 25% of the European energy mix. In the path towards to 2050, we can expect decreasing natural gas demand and increasing supply of low carbon renewable gases such as biogas, biomethane, and of course hydrogen. The production of biogas and biomethane in particular could help to decrease methane emissions from agriculture sector and waste, on condition and methane emissions from the production and transport of low carbon gases are minimized. In the EU strategy for energy system integration, the European Commission proposed that an annual European CCU forum could be convened as part of the Clear Energy System Industrial Forum to further study the options to foster CCUS projects. In this regard, I think that we have to consider what kind of role could play CCS and CCU, the so-called CCUS, can play. According to my opinion, it could play a crucial role in order to decarbonize our energy mix. The EU hydrogen strategy includes the use of fossil-based hydrogen combined, of course, with the carbon capture, with the caveat of the Commission that is saying that must address upstream methane emissions occurring during the production and transport of natural gas and propose mitigating measures as part of the upcoming EU strategy on methane. Therefore, we should focus on policy action for renewables and low carbon hydrogen. It is not only the green hydrogen at the very first step, but we have to consider that we have to use under condition blue hydrogen in order to have the adequate quantities of hydrogen we need in order to decarbonize our energy mix. That's why I'm putting on the table the case of utilization and or storage of CCS and CCUs and pyrolysis as well. I would like to ask you to take into account the increasing demand for natural gas in some EU member states, such as Poland, and the gradual substitution of natural gas with low carbon alternatives, the issue for the prevention and abandonment of methane emission, and of course, it is important to take into account. In this regard, I would like just once again to thank you for attending this seminar, and of course to thank the participants and to thank our panelists. And I would like to ask you to put on the floor your perspectives. Once again, thank you very much for the attention.
Thank you very much, Ms. Spyraki, for setting the scene with regards to today's discussions. I think that following your speech, we're all very much looking forward to the intervention of the European Commission. Prior to that, it's with great pleasure to have with us MEP Ms. Paulus as well. Ms. Paulus is a member of the European Parliament for the Greens, FA group, also member of ENVI committee, but also substitute member for the Committee on Industry, Research and Energy, but also the Committee of Transport and Tourism. So without further ado, Ms. Paulus, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ilias. Thank you very much for having me, for inviting me to this very important event. And thank you very much, Maria, for setting the scene so comprehensively and efficiently. I am a bit set back because you already mentioned nearly all the important points, but I might as well start with a study I was stumbling over some months back, where I was pretty surprised that maybe our figures on the methane emissions of the respective sectors might not be true after all. Why is that? Some very innovative scientists have measured not only the amount of methane that is in the atmosphere, but they have looked at the isotopes. What is an isotope? Each element is characterized by the number of protons in the nucleus of the atom, and but the number of neutrons is variable. For example, when we take carbon, the normal form, which is most often prevailing, has 12 protons, but there is also a form with 12 neutrons. There is also one with, no, sorry, I got mixed up. We have 6 protons, 6 neutrons in the most common form. Then we have 7 neutrons in the a little bit rarer form, and we have 8 when it comes to radioactive carbon, which is formed in the high atmosphere through radiation by the sun and by space. Radioactive carbon is radioactive, so it disappears over time because it is broken down by its own radioactivity. And with this element, you have a sort of a clock, because we know the half-time of 14 carbon, because it weighs 14 grams per mole. And the older the molecule is, the less 14C is present in there, because in the high atmosphere, this radioactive carbon is formed time over time, every day. As soon as sun rays hit the nitrogen up there, this radioactive carbon is formed. So when we have oil and gas, which has been buried below the ground for millions of years, it doesn't not contain any radioactive carbon anymore, because it's all been long gone. And what these researchers did, they looked at the isotope distribution of the carbon, of the methane that is in the atmosphere. And so they found out that we're probably underestimating the methane emissions from oil, gas, coal production by at least 25%, which is really a lot. And this shows why we must tackle this sector so urgently, as Maria has laid out so proficiently and comprehensively. Thanks again very much. And as Maria has also said, most of the emissions can actually be curbed at no extra cost. And if we are addressing only these emissions that can be avoided at no extra cost, because of course, any gas that is not fugitive, that is not leaking from the applications, from the pipelines, from the valves, from the wells, can be sold at the end of the day. So what we have to solve is the dilemma between the grid operators, who would have to make up for fixing these leakages, and the companies selling the gas. Because the one side says, well, never mind how much is going through, because I don't sell it, I only get paid for the pipeline. And the other side says, well, we're not the owner of the pipeline, so how on earth are we going to fix it? We have to fix this dilemma, at least in Europe, but I think that should be the smaller exercise that should be possible between business partners to find a contractual way of doing this. And if we manage to do just this, then, and I've spoken to a person from the United Nations Environmental Program, those are the guys that are always publishing the emission gap report, saying how big is our overshoot of emissions if we want to keep to the Paris Agreement. And he said, if we would only curb all the emissions that are avoidable at no extra cost, then we could already close 15% of our emission gap. 15% at no extra cost. I think it is high time that we really address this issue, because it does not hurt anyone, it does not cost anyone anything, and we are really making a giant leap if we achieve that. When it comes to hydrogen, Maria, I must contradict you a bit. I mean, we're in different political groups, so I think it's normal that we are not sharing the same opinion on all issues. I would rather see the fostering of green hydrogen, because any money that we put into blue hydrogen will actually make green hydrogen less competitive. And green hydrogen is the only way that we can actually really work without any emissions, neither methane emissions of the pre-chains nor CO2 emissions, because carbon capture and storage or use has never, up to now, has never been more efficient than 80 or 85%. So we would have 10 to 15 to 20% escaping whenever we use this. When it comes to the agreement that is in preparation at the global level with the oil and gas methane partnership, I think this is really important, and I think that the companies will soon realize that a lot of industry partners, business partners, but also private consumers in Europe are very, very worried about climate change, and that they will be looking for a responsible supplier of fossil gas, as long as I'm afraid we will not be able to switch everything to renewables within 10 or 15 years, let alone do all the investment that we need in industry where fossil gas is still used at large scale, especially when it comes to processes which need a lot of heat. So I think the International Oil and Gas and Methane Partnership is the very first step in the right direction. And with the data that the European Union is already providing through the Copernicus program, I think we will hear some more from Kairos during the course of this meeting. We will also be able to, control a bit whether everyone is holding true to his or her words, because the time for nice words and for pragmatic talks but no action is definitely over. We are seeing the devastating impacts of climate change, not only in countries far away, but also here in Europe, when I'm thinking of the summers with virtually no rain, when I'm thinking of what Sardinia has been living through these days. And I think this should be the very first start in curbing methane emissions. Of course, we will have to act on agriculture only. That will be a lot more difficult than acting in the oil and gas sector. But we have to start somewhere, and I think it is the right step to do it here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Paulus, for your intervention. I think it perfectly underlines the timely nature of today's discussion. Also, indeed, there is the need for reliable and accurate data is imperative. So at this stage, I would like to welcome Ms. Kitty Nitrai, our next speaker. On behalf of the European Commission, Ms. Kitty Nitrai is a member of the Cabinet of European Commissioner for Energy, Ms. Simpson. Having joined DG Energy in 2007, Ms. Nitrai has throughout the years worked on the security of gas supplies, while she has also led the development and institutional negotiations of the European Union Trans-European Energy Networks policy. So I think it's an intervention we're all very much looking forward. Ms. Nitrai, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, honorable members and ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for inviting me to this event. I feel honored to be able to give you an overview of the key policies that I have been following and I have been advising Commissioner Simpson about during this mandate. Indeed, we started this adventure, the mandate of this new commission, exactly 1 year ago. So it is a very nice moment to take a moment and think of what we have done already in this first year and to look ahead what we will still deliver. And indeed, this commission is the most ambitious commission so far on climate change. And indeed, the commission has, and President von der Leyen has put forward her vision of a European Green Deal and to make Europe become the first climate neutral continent by 2050. But when these policies were put forward, we couldn't fully realize how important they would become with time, because the European Green Deal is not just about fighting climate change and accelerating the green energy transition. It was already meant at the beginning as the European New Growth Strategy. And when we see the devastating impact of this current pandemics on our economies, the Green Deal will be even more important to build back the economy, to invest and to build back the economy better than it was before. So in this context, I would like to say a couple of words about the strategies that we have adopted to make the Green Deal a reality. And I would like to start indeed the energy system integration and the hydrogen strategies, because they were the first ones where we took a holistic view at the energy system, and we tried to anticipate how it will evolve with the objective of climate neutrality in mind by 2050. And we realized, first of all, that we can't look at the energy sectors in separation anymore. We have to look at them in an integrated way, because it's only like this that we will be able to harness all the synergies that we need in order to make this transition not only effective, but also cost efficient for the benefit of our businesses and for the affordability of energy for our citizens. So this was the first revelation that we made when we were designing our policies. The other important factor that we considered, that our modeling shows that in all the scenarios for climate neutrality, the role of electricity will increase. So nearly half of our electricity, or in some scenarios, even more than half of our energy by 2050 will be used in the form of electricity. So there will be a much stronger push for electrification, because electricity can be conveniently used for decarbonizing sectors that have been so far out of reach. So many areas of road transport, but also it provides one of the most efficient forms of space heating through, for example, electric heat pumps. But when we say that half of the energy system will be electric, it means also that the other half will have to be provided in other forms of energy. So it will be certainly a small part in the form of heat, but the other part will be provided in the forms of gases and fuels. So we have heard Honourable Member Spyraki speak about the role of gas, and also Honourable Member Paulus about their views on the role of gas, which is very close to the views of my commissioner. we consider that the Commission considers that Europe will need natural gas for the transition. So natural gas will play a role in the transition, also by substituting rapidly more polluting fossil fuels. But that in the longer term, so as we go towards 2050, the gas sector also needs to be decarbonized. So natural gas will need to be replaced either by abated forms of gas, but also especially through renewable gases. And we have already heard about biogas, which will more than triple in the period until then, but also about clean hydrogen. So especially our focus when we prepared our hydrogen strategy is clearly renewable hydrogen, because renewable hydrogen is the one where we see the highest added value. It's both in terms of decarbonization potential, because it has the lowest emissions, but also in terms of system integration potential, because it can indeed help also the system manage the variability of renewable energies. It can nicely complement the variability of sun and wind. It can store energy, and it can help manage the electricity system. However, when we also looked at the figures, we saw that the current European consumption of grey hydrogen, so not clean hydrogen, is nearly 10 million tons. And despite our very ambitious plans to install at least 40 gigawatts of electrolyzers to produce renewable hydrogen by 2030, that would only take us to about 10 million tons of clean hydrogen. So we consider that for a time, in order to quickly replace the current gray hydrogen through cleaner forms, we might also need the so-called blue hydrogen, so hydrogen produced from natural gas with the carbon content captured. So this brings me to the methane part again, because indeed the relevance of methane has already been outlined by the honorable members, so I won't insist on the importance. I just would like to mention that indeed what we do today for the methane, it will be very important indeed to improve the greenhouse gas performance of existing natural gas, but it will be also beneficial for the future, because if we manage indeed to avoid that any gas escapes the system, that will be good also for keeping all the biogas and all the hydrogen within our networks. So this is very important also for in the longer term. So when we come to the methane strategy, indeed the first methane strategy was adopted a long time ago by the Commission in 1996. And a lot of things have happened since then. A lot of action has taken place, especially in the waste and wastewater sectors. But somehow, indeed, the energy sector has lagged behind. And there was no legislation following up on the old strategy. So indeed, as already Honorable Member Spyraki and Paulus said, indeed, in the energy sector, it is the sector where methane emissions can be tackled at the lowest cost, and nearly half of the emissions indeed can be tackled at not net zero cost. So this is why we would like to indeed quickly now follow up with the further action on the strategy. And as it was already identified, data is a problem. And the example of Honorable Member Paulus was just underpinning the finding that we have also made, that the data we have there today is probably correct at a global and level, but probably the breakdown among sectors might be flawed, and we just don't know, because the EU is actually on the lowest level of reporting standard also in the UN context when it comes to methane emissions. So we consider that it is necessary to step up the European reporting also on methane emissions, because through the measurement of which emissions are there today, we can also track down the achievements that we make in this field. So indeed, methane is very important to be tackled, because it was also demonstrated that because it's so potent, the methane, when it is released in the atmosphere, it's much stronger than CO2. But then it decomposes quicker, so the effect lasts less long. but it's still very, very important. So it was found by studies that by cutting methane emissions by half, it could have an impact to reduce the global temperatures by 0.18 degrees centigrade. So it is quite an important part to do that. And we have our climate target plan modeling has showed that in order to reach our at least 55% reduction target by 2030, we have to step up the reduction of methane emissions to about 35 to 37%. So all our policies are geared indeed towards doing that. As much of it was already mentioned, I will just come back on the actions that will follow concretely and that may have been not so clear so far. So we will indeed propose legislation that will be, we are already preparing the ground, and next year we will propose legislation on monitoring, reporting and verification of methane emissions. So with the ambition to improve the reporting standard within the EU. And at the same time, as not all action requires previous data, we will also immediately propose legislation for the leak detection and repair, so as to start immediately reducing the emissions without having to wait for all the data. We spoke already about the oil and gas methane partnership, which is a voluntary initiative that the Commission has supported and is supporting. And indeed, Commissioner Simpson has co-hosted the launch of the OGMP 2.0 together with the United Nations Environmental Programme. And indeed, that launch took place last week, Monday. So it is very, very important because with all the signatory companies who cover a large part of the oil and gas action globally, those companies can already immediately start with the new higher reporting standards and already immediately commit to reduce their methane emissions. So the Commission has been very supportive of this initiative. And the other initiative I would like to, in particular, draw the attention is the International Methane Observatory. This is an initiative that the European Commission is currently working on together with the United Nations Environmental Programme to launch this observatory. And we look forward also to working with the International Energy Agency in this. And we are already identifying the budget in order to contribute financially. But we, of course, would like international partners to chip in for the financing of this observatory. But as it was already mentioned, one of the key elements that we are going to bring to the table for this observatory is indeed EU satellite data. So the EU currently is world leader in the monitoring of environmental, so the environmental monitoring by satellites. And these data we can already bring to the table for the observatory. So it will be a very, very important international cooperation, and we see also growing interest, political interest from also other producer countries, and we hope that we can launch it successfully in the near future. We already mentioned indeed the benefits or the bridges that we can build through the methane strategy between the different sectors, and of course the agriculture and the energy sector are a key example, because all the methane that is not emitted in agriculture can be captured and used as in the form of biogas in the EU. So this is also very important point in our strategy. I would like to come back just to the international dimension, because and this will be my last point. In the EU, we are actually just a small emitter of methane, because much of the emissions of the gas and oil that we import and then we consume in the EU is actually produced outside the EU. So indeed, for us, it's extremely important to have a dialogue with our international partners, both on bilaterally as well as in multilateral fora, both with producer countries, in order to encourage them to really reduce venting, flaring, and methane emissions all along the production processes, but also with consumer countries in order to work and to learn from each other on common policies. there's been much discussion about the possibility to introduce a standard, a methane performance standard, or a methane import standard. This is something that the Commission has committed to look into it in the strategy, but there requires further careful reflection in order to see how such a mechanism could work and how it could be implemented. So this is one of the follow-up actions that we will be looking into in the near future. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ms. Nitrai, for highlighting why and also how the European Commission is stepping up its work on methane in the context of the Green Deal, inter alia focusing on growth too, as well as highlighted, but also towards reaching the future emissions targets. At this stage, I'm very glad to present Ms. Poppy Kalesi, our next speaker, who holds the position of Director of Global Energy within the Environmental Defense Fund, EDF. Ms. Kalesi leads the EDF Energy Program in Europe with a focus on delivering EU policies that will contribute to deep reductions in global oil and gas methane emissions by 2025. So Ms. Kalesi, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Leah, and thank you everyone for making the time to be with us and share insights, particularly the MEPs, the Commission, and of course the German presidency, and not least the innovators and civil society colleagues who are all using time to bring some more perspectives to what is a complex issue of system integration and how to get this right. I would like to focus my contribution to really the system integration strategy and hydrogen and what we should be looking to achieve with those two strategies. I think when we map the trajectory towards a climate neutral Europe by 2050, we see that in 2040, about 50% of the warming caused by this year's greenhouse gas emissions will come from anthropogenic methane. This is, of course, because as Ms. Spyraki and Ms. Paulus and Ms. Nitrai have noted, methane is 84 to 87 times more potent than CO2 in the first 20 years after it's been emitted. So, in other words, the impact of greenhouse gas emissions emitted this year over the next 20 years, methane will have a very big role in that impact. The Commission proposals on both the sector integration and hydrogen strategies bring the right level of ambition and direction in terms of the evolution of the energy system. However, as we see in both the Parliament and Council's emerging consensus, there is some reluctance to harness all of the EU's hopes on an accelerated, smooth electrification scenario. And this suggests that as a matter of contingency planning and to ensure we stay on track in terms of emissions reductions, we need a dual focus. We need first to focus on cleaning up CO2 and methane emissions in the EU's energy system today, and second, to build up the low carbon energy system of tomorrow. This is something that all previous speakers have also concurred on, and I was very pleased to hear, but I think it's worth underlining that. The other thing is that those strategies should clearly establish a merit order, a hierarchy of actions for market participants. As Ms. Nitrai underlined, on the path to electrification, not all sources of energy will be equal, and not all molecules or electrons will be equal. So at the most fundamental level, this would require the sector integration and hydrogen strategies to establish a clear merit order, starting from energy efficiency in Europe's domestic energy networks, then prioritizing reductions in both CO2 and methane emissions along the EU's energy supply chains. And this will, of course, now include natural gas, but in the future it will also include hydrogen that is produced through natural gas. And third, it's about setting clear and stable clear and stable investment signals to ensure higher take-up of innovative, future-proof technologies and a faster track to industrialization for promising technologies that deliver CO2 and methane reductions. I was very pleased to see that both Mr. Grudler's and Mr. Gaia's reports, which are currently under consideration in the Industry Committee, align with this approach, and so is a first look at the Environment Committee amendments to this opinion. So where are we going now? If we let these broad principles guide us on how to approach the two strategies, then it's clear that a few things need to happen. First, we need to address emissions in the gas supply chain. According to the Commission's own modelling, natural gas use will continue well into 2050, albeit in a reduced role, and this is something Ms. Mitra has touched upon. What we don't yet know is how these scenarios might look like if updated for hydrogen production through natural gas, and whether natural gas continues to be delivered at the border to be cracked into hydrogen once it crosses the border, or it arrives at the border in the form of a hydrogen molecule. The issue of methane emissions at the production segment remains. Considering that around 25% of the warming experienced in 2040 will come from the oil and gas industry, fixing the methane problem in its supply chain remains critical, even in a scenario where hydrogen overtakes oil and gas as core business. The point is that if Europe's needs in dense, flexible forms of energy remain strong until 2030, and if the primary energy source is gas, then anyone buying gas or hydrogen produced through steam reforming of natural gas should have full visibility of the methane emissions associated with the product they buy and be accountable for it. To make this happen, a core feature of gas market reform should be a mandatory methane performance standards, consistent with what the industry considers to be feasible, and the OGCI, the Oil and Gas Climate Initiative, which is an initiative led by CEOs of all the European supermajors, concurs that a 0.2% methane intensity by 2025 is feasible to achieve. Second, we need to create a level playing field for different energy sources by establishing CO2 and methane performance standards as a Northern Star. As it stands, gas enjoys a significant role in the EU's energy mix. Ms. Spyraki said it's 25%, and those wishing to decarbonize industrial processes and heating face significant markets and technological barriers. In market terms, gas is cheaper than electricity, and this makes it difficult for both households and industrial energy systems to switch to electricity, which is currently accounting for 22% of final energy use. So electrification is actually a really big challenge. It will be done, but I think it's not the size of the scale that we're talking about. In technology and physical system terms, lack of availability of large-scale power storage means that direct electrification will not necessarily act as an enabler for building more renewable capacity, which is intermittent. The fact that decarbonization efforts have thus far focused on the power sector, whilst the gas sector did not face any sustainability requirements, has certainly exacerbated the problem. Establishing a methane performance standard would enable internalizing the environmental externalities of gas in the wholesale gas price and establishing mandatory procurement standards, thereby helping to ensure that the price of gas reflects its true cost. But we recognize that on its own, gas market reform may not be sufficient to level the playing field. So therefore, the strategy should also consider how this could be done through other mechanisms, such as reforming the Energy Taxation Directive and the 10E regulation. And finally, we need to invest in new infrastructure with this merit order in mind. Last month, the EU Ombudsman highlighted some significant failures in assessing the environmental impact of projects receiving PCI status. Many members of Parliament have already expressed the need to ensure that any future taxpayer energy infrastructure subsidies are conditional on adherence to strict sustainability criteria. The same approach should apply to any public support that might be granted to hydrogen projects. The EU's hydrogen strategy addresses the issue of methane emissions and makes it clear that there can be no blue hydrogen without solving the dual CO2 and methane performance challenge. This is a great starting point for addressing a crucial piece of the climate equation. Methane emissions performance should be as critical as financial robustness for any hydrogen subsidies to be granted to avoid creating loopholes. Opening up a new market for converting gas to hydrogen without clearly establishing how the corresponding methane emissions will be dealt with would only make a serious problem much worse. In summary, we should support the vision of a renewables-based energy system promoted by the two strategies, but we should also acknowledge that oil and gas will be with us to some degree for decades to come. And so it is equally important that these strategies address those sectors. I hope I have provided members with some food for thoughts on how this could be achieved, and I very much look forward to further insights. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Kalesi, for your key input, but also for your policy recommendations looking ahead. That brings us now to Mr. Stefan Rolle, who is Head of Division for Gas and Oil Markets and Emergency Preparedness at the German Federal Ministry for Economic Affairs and Energy. Prior to that, Mr. Rolle was also Head of Division for New Energy Technologies, while he also led various tasks and positions within the Directorate General for External Economic Policy and also Energy. So, Mr. Rolle, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much for inviting me today for this very interesting discussion on various aspects of methane emission and how we can integrate them into system integration and also hydrogen strategies by the European Commission. And we take the issue of methane in Germany very seriously, and we welcome also the very ongoing public debate, not only in Germany, but far beyond, concerning the question of methane emissions due to the production or transportation of natural gas. However, research on this issue has been ambiguous so far. At this stage, data availability as well as empirical studies regarding methane emissions due to production, transportation, or consumption are insufficient and do not allow for comprehensive conclusions. Against this background, it is imperative that the issue is scientifically investigated and evaluated further. Therefore, Germany supports very much studies commissioned by the European Commission that may help to expand our knowledge and insight into the issue of methane emissions, particularly in the energy sector, but not only in the energy sector. We welcome, therefore, the integrated EU methane strategy published by the Commission in October that aims at the reduction of methane emissions. In particular, we welcome the strategy's holistic approach to methane emissions. That means that the strategy should include and must include, and obviously also will include, not only the energy sector, but also the waste and agriculture sector. The holistic approach seeks to coordinate actions within these three sectors. Nevertheless, the strategy prioritizes the abatement and reduction of methane emissions in the energy sector. Furthermore, we welcome the strategy's proposed commitments regarding more accurate measurement and reporting, as well as more effective mitigation measures, and of course, the announced legislative proposal. And in Germany, we are dedicated to supporting research on evaluation of methane emissions. Our goal is to broaden our knowledge of the issue as well, to find a common scientifically based ground for future discussions on policy and regulation. Wherefore, we commissioned our Bundesanstalt für Geowissenschaften und Rohstoffe, that is the Federal Institute for Geosciences and Natural Resources, to conduct further studies on methane emissions and other greenhouse gases that occur within the upstream chain of natural gas. In 2019, we commissioned the Federal Institute to write a meta-study on the issue of methane emissions that occur within the value chain of natural gas. Moreover, we plan to support a project by the Deutsche Brennstoffinstitut Freiberg, that is the German research institute called DBI, that aims to measure energy-related methane emissions along the upstream chain of natural gas in Russia. And in addition, I must say that in also discussions we have had with other member states of the European Union, we also have a feeling that the reporting standards have to be implemented by the Commission. We already have some reporting standards in different member states, but we have to harmonize them. I think this is very important also. And in this context, the EU should also take a leading role within the international context. I think Europe is far is in a very leading role and should also emphasize it even more. The methane footprint, which could be considered, but also a very one-sided footprint, and we have to combine it with other footprints like the CO2 emission footprint. I think these are the this is for next year's the strategy that should be followed, and we are in full line with the Commission's proposal and will support them. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rolle, for your intervention. It's at this stage with pleasure to welcome Mr. Georg Hatzimarkakis, who is the Secretary General of Hydrogen Europe since 2016. Prior to that, Mr. Hatzimarkakis was also a member of the European Parliament from 2004 to 2014. Inter alia, member of several parliamentary committees, such as the one for the environment and health, but also the one on agriculture. Mr. Hatzimarkakis, we're delighted to hear more from you. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, and also thank you for the honor of being somehow back in Parliament. I would first of all like to praise the job, the work that Poppy does, because she's the one who permanently puts the methane issue on the agenda, and I really think we have to be grateful for that. But let me start. You mentioned I've been member of Parliament, and I stay, of course, a political person. I'm a member of an ecological party, and having a look at the methane emissions, not much more, but more than half of it comes from agriculture. You mentioned yourself agriculture. And I think that should be mentioned also, that we as humans should be a little bit more coherent in our strategies. I remember that the European Parliament, but also the Council, did adopt the very same week the minus 55% of CO2 emission approach, which is absolutely applaudable and could even be more aggressive. But the very same week, the agricultural policy was just adopted with some slight changes. I'm very, very happy that Executive Vice President Timmermans basically put his veto against this, because this is not coherent. This shows that we just continue with industrial farming to have big subsidies, big support as consumers, but also as taxpayers in the biggest methane source. I think that needs to change. Farm to fork is a very, very good possibility to stop it. And as your intergroup covers also biodiversity, I want to mention that should we stop industrial farming, we not only have less methane emissions, but also less problems for biodiversity. However, there's also an angle for hydrogen here, because fertilizers are mainly produced with natural gas. And globally, fertilizers at the moment are the biggest consumer for hydrogen, unfortunately produced with natural gas, as I said. And this can be changed. We can immediately use green hydrogen that can be used as a feedstock for fertilizers. And so this is a very low-hanging fruit to overcome the chicken and egg dilemma once we go for a hydrogen strategy. Now, let me turn to the other parts. 26% of methane emissions come from waste. And here we enter in seeing an interest as the hydrogen sector, because there is one technology that is quite promising to reduce these emissions. That's pyrolysis. Pyrolysis will also play a role in the energy sector, but in the waste sector, if we have good mechanisms to command the CO2 emissions, we will have out of this waste, with the pyrolysis technology, clean hydrogen and, of course, a commandable CO2. Now, let me come to the energy sector. I would like to cut it very simple. The hydrogen strategy that has been adopted by the European Commission and my old friend and colleague Jens Geier, as a rapporteur today, presented his report on the own initiative report of the Parliament in the ITRE committee. This strategy thrives for a replacement. Hydrogen can replace coal for the production of steel or for the production of power. It can replace oil and it can replace natural gas. We don't want to replace biogas or synthetic methane, synthetic gases, because here you have a very good possibility to reduce with biogas, to reduce methane. Gases also have a good capacity to reduce the emission because they are based on renewable production of hydrogen. What we also see is that we will see some steps in going there. Kitty already mentioned the big target that we have to produce 1 million ton of renewably produced hydrogen already in 2024. This is within the term of the current Commission, which is quite ambitious, but doable. In the European Clean Hydrogen Alliance that has been launched the very same day where the two initiatives that have been mentioned here in this meeting have also been launched. We are looking for implementing these steps, 1 million ton or 6 gigawatt of electrolyzer capacity until 24, let's say 25, and then another 5 years to have a tenfold result. And this would lead to a step-by-step replacement also of natural gas, which is for us the best way to use current infrastructure. That's why the 10E regulation is so important. And that is also why we ask for amending the annex of the 10E to add a fifth category for the infrastructure, for the use of infrastructure, electricity, CO2, gas, oil, and the fifth would be then hydrogen, so as a new category. And then we will see steps 2030 and 2050, where basically everything will be replaced. So these 20 years from 2030 to 2050 will be very, very important to have a, well, basically total replacement of fossil energy. There's one technology that I would like to mention because especially Jutta, Paulus, but also Poppy asked for innovation. That is pyrolysis of methane. Pyrolysis of methane can reduce the emissions to zero. Of course, at the place where this happens, it does not avoid the methane leakage that happens at the origin. That's another question. However, pyrolysis is 5 times cheaper than electrolysis. So we would have a cheaper access to clean hydrogen, as what you get from pyrolysis is hydrogen and solid carbon. So which you can bury or which you can use as a feedstock. However, we are 10 years behind when it comes to the TRL, so the maturity of this technology. But we believe that pyrolysis can be a very good addition to the non-questionable and to be prioritized green, so renewable hydrogen production. Now, let me come to one element that is important to reduce, so to say, also methane leakage with our trading partners outside the EU. At the moment, we are importing a lot of fossil energy, especially from Arab countries, but also from Russia. I would like to remind you that especially Saudi Arabia, at the last G20 summit that they hosted, declared the next years of the age of green oil. What they mean is to produce especially green hydrogen and thereof some derivatives like ammonia, but also synthetic fuels and synthetic gases, taking biogenic or circular CO2 to combine it with renewably produced hydrogen. So we will see here anyhow a new production line, and we should ask our Saudi Arabian, I wouldn't say partners, I would say trading partners, to go for that. However, we could, with a carbon border adjustment mechanism, make a clear distinction between the commodities we want and the commodities we don't want. We need to understand that carbon content will be the new currency. So reducing carbon content of the fuel that comes in will be the criterion also at the border to say we tax it or not. At the moment, the European Parliament is discussing these issues, and we are looking into this because we think carbon content as the new currency is a possibility also to reduce via trade and via pricing of methane leakage. And we believe very much in the 5 T's when it comes also or how much of carbon is in a ton of hydrogen, which is the traceability, the trackability of this ton of hydrogen and the renewable origin, traceability, trackability, transparency, very important, and the tradability in order to create trust, a system of trust. And we think that the hydrogen strategy is a good basis to get there. However, we need to act fast and we need to set global standards as Europeans. At the moment, this hydrogen strategy brings us somehow into a pole position, but we need to implement it. This happens in the Clean Hydrogen Alliance, but also in other with other tools, and we are happy to help with Hydrogen Europe and the members that are from different sectors, from different parts of the value chain, also to overcome the chicken and egg dilemma. Thanks very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Spyraki, for your remarks with reference to best practices, but also policy recommendations towards addressing methane emissions in the EU, but also globally. Seeing that we're moving very well with regards to timing and our agenda forward, I would just like to remind our audience to send us your Q&As via the Q&As box that should appear on the right-hand side of your screen. When you do that, please also make sure to choose the all panelists option and let us know which speaker your question is best addressed. Moving on, it's with pleasure to also have with us Mr. Andreas Graf. Mr. Graf holds the position of project manager for EU energy policy at the Berlin-based think tank Agora Energy Wende. Throughout the years, his work has touched on the issue of methane leakage in the gas sector, since conducting also research for the German Environment Ministry back in 2015. Mr. Graf, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you. You should now see my screen. So thank you very much to all the speakers so far for the wonderful discussion. And I hope I will not be belaboring too much the points already made. But I thought I would just add a few thoughts going in a similar direction, adding a few visual aids that I hope will round off the discussion and maybe help to reinforce some of the points previously made. So first of all, I think it always helps to have this visualization just to make sense of, oh, and now I must be getting a package. My apologies. So, one second. I think it always helps to have this visual representation to understand the effects of global warming, of the different greenhouse gases that we're discussing, mainly in the context of methane leakage in the energy sector. So on the one hand, we have methane with a much higher warming potential, and CO2 in the short term, and CO2 with a very different durability, so to say, in the atmosphere. So on the left, you see the warming effect of global emissions from methane, which in terms of volumes are much smaller, being equal essentially to the warming of global annual CO2 emissions. On the other hand, the duration of CO2 in the atmosphere is much longer. In fact, and it remains in the atmosphere in a duration that is beyond the lifespan of most of the viewers here today. The practical effect of this is that by reducing greenhouse gas emissions in the form of methane, we can essentially also see a cooling effect in a much shorter time frame. By contrast, when reducing CO2 emissions or deciding to abate CO2 emissions by, for example, switching from coal to renewables, the global greenhouse gas warming effect that has already taken place remains with us for the future unless we engage in negative emissions. This is essentially the key reason why in the past, when we discussed methane leakage, we often had this discussion about the trade-off of coal versus gas. And just a few years ago, the IEA produced this figure on the left, which shows essentially the break-even points with regards to methane leakage when using the methane for combustion in power plants. And it shows that there is at some point a break-even point with methane leakage in which a power plant using gas with high methane leakage will be more polluting than a coal plant. This is, of course, a very low bar, considering that both are polluting. However, they make the fundamental point that there is a trade-off in the sense of the greenhouse gas warming effect that we have. Now, luckily, we have now gone beyond this very low bar when it comes to our discussion on methane leakage as to whether we should be producing power with coal plants or gas plants. And the key driving forces of this are, of course, the ongoing conversation on the one hand about higher climate ambition in the 2030 timeframe. And on the other hand, of course, the promise and the commitment to net zero by 2050. When looking in the 2050 timeframe, the conversation we had on the left is simply no longer possible because both are no longer compatible with our future emissions scenarios. Now, the question then becomes, what role does the methane leakage conversation have then in this new picture? And what we are seeing is definitely a change in the way we're dealing with it. For example, in the past, we might have focused more on, again, coal versus gas, whereas now we also look at the effects that we will have by accelerating a coal phase out in terms of reduced methane leakage from coal mines, which are also a key source of methane. And this both in the EU and the global perspective. On the other hand, we continue to have similar trade-offs in the short term for technologies that will be more difficult to scale quickly. And when projecting out into the future, we now have a much clearer pathway of how we will achieve net zero. The long-term strategy has, if I remember correctly, 8 different scenarios. So many different pathways for achieving net zero. And all of them, in one form or another, involve hydrogen, for example. This being said, we will have to make decisions as to how to move forward quickly. And this is triggering conversations about that are similar to the ones in the past now around coal. So essentially, should we accept that investments in gas in the short term might still have a significant climate benefit if it's going to take us a while to scale green hydrogen quickly? Or on the other hand, the belief that we should simply commit to phasing out fossil fuels entirely and switching, going full cold turkey into renewables. Now, I think this is going to, this conversation is going to remain. Important, however, is that regardless of what role, whether limited or very limited, blue hydrogen plays in the future, the issue of upstream emissions will have to be tackled if it is going to be part of the mix and truly contribute to climate change mitigation. And the same is true for the urgency with which we have to address the issue of scaling green hydrogen. The alternative or the trade-off simply cannot be between blue hydrogen and green hydrogen, but it must be about phasing out gray hydrogen as soon as possible, meaning fossil hydrogen without CCS. And finally, we as we've heard from several speakers today, it is increasingly evident that we also need to tackle the issue of methane emissions at the global scale, because as important as it is to reduce emissions in Europe with regards to methane, the scale is much bigger globally. So on the left, you see the amount of upstream emissions from coal mines globally. Poland specifically is a country with in Europe with significant methane emissions from deep coal mining. On the other hand, when seen in global perspective, they are extremely small, especially with regards to China. And therefore, it is of course important that we engage very strongly with China to move forward towards net zero and to phase out, help them to phase out coal as soon as possible. The same is of course true, as has been highlighted several times and will be shown also by the next speaker, I'm sure, with regards to methane emissions when looking at satellite imagery, many of these emissions coming from oil and gas production. So what this makes clear is that we need to engage with our trading partners, as has been stated before, and set strong standards with regards to the internal market of the EU. It is a key strength in engaging with our partners and driving emissions reductions with regards to methane at a global scale. And the EU methane strategy, and I think importantly also the recent US electoral result, are key first steps towards potentially having a strong global strategy. But as the Commission representative has stated so far, the decision to adopt strong methane performance standards was essentially delayed at this point in time. The Commission will now strongly or I think seriously assess the need for such performance standards, and also within the context of its border carbon adjustment mechanism discussion, look at the feasibility of having strong methane performance standards. But it will also be incumbent upon politicians in the European Parliament, but also pressure from the streets to make sure that this is actually something that the Commission moves forward with. And I would welcome this discussion being taken forward much more strongly with that pressure. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Graf, for building on the science policy nexus, but also for very much stimulating the discussion to follow. Our following speaker is Mr. Rostand. Mr. Antoine Rostand is the president and founder of the data analytics company Kairos, and serves as a board member of the A.T. Kearney Energy Transition Institute as well. Mr. Rostand has more than 25 years of experience now in the energy industry, so I think it's an intervention we're very much looking forward. Mr. Rostand, you have the floor. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, and good morning, good afternoon. We're really listening to this very important and interesting panel. I am the technology guy in the room, and I'm going to give an update on methane monitoring. And my main message will be that will be a message of optimism, because thanks to the assets that Europe has sent in the space, so in particular the Copernicus satellite, we are a turning point today for climate action, because we do have the tools and the data to start mitigating, reducing methane emission that we can now see from space. Every orange dot that you see here is something that we've detected in 2019. There are a lot of them, and we believe that it could all be eliminated within 2 or 3 years, which will represent an abatement of 1 gigaton of CO2 equivalent per annum in the very short term. So it's certainly, as it has been said before, the fastest way to buy climate credit, climate budget, and we believe it's a time to act and put methane import standards so that we can eliminate these fugitive emissions. I will not, I will just repeat what has been said before, that addressing methane is the fastest way to reduce temperature rise, and we can start now. And the sooner we start, the better it is. The problem is well known. This is the increase of methane emission, and it's completely out of control. It has increased by 254% since the beginning of the industrial era, while CO2 has increased only, if we can say that, by 143%. So methane is not controlled because we cannot, until now, we could not measure it. For CO2, we know how much coal, how much gas, how much oil is produced and burned. So we have an idea of what anthropogenic emissions are in CO2. Methane we don't know, because until now we couldn't see it. And the consequence of not seeing is that if there is no reason why we cannot control that, was the fact that there was no monitoring technology. And without monitoring technology, then all reporting are kind of questionable. You see on the left the same estimation of methane emission, one done by the IEA, which is a global upstream average of methane intensity of a kilogram of methane per terajoule of energy produced, and they are at around 200. And we've looked at the ESG report of 20 large oil and gas company, and their average is 21. So we have a factor 10 between what is reported and what is estimated by the IEA. Nobody really knows what it is. So we've done some measurement by satellite. We don't see everything, but we are certainly closer to the IEA number than what is currently reported. So the good news is this is changing, and this is changing because of two assets that have been, space assets that have been launched by the European Commission. The first one is Sentinel-5P, whose job is to detect and quantify large methane leaks. You see on the left a big plume of methane, which is in Algeria, and it's 150 kilometers long. And this is very important to understand that the only way to quantify methane leak is to have a satellite that covers the full globe, because we need to see the full plume. Some plumes that we have seen in Iraq are 400 or 500 kilometers long. So a satellite that will just look at a very small part of the globe won't be able to quantify and see all these plumes. So the role of Sentinel-5P is to identify these big plumes, and we see tens of them every day. most of them on the energy sector, oil and gas and coal, but also the distribution network, marshlands, and other industrial sites. So today we have a tool that is working, and we detect with the AI or the artificial intelligence that we've put on top of European data set, we can identify the big source of methane. The question is, the pixel size is 5 by 7, so we don't really know where it's coming from. And what we've cracked, in fact, a couple of weeks ago, is to be able to use another European satellite, Sentinel-2, with a refreshed, daily global coverage with a revisit time of 3 days and a 20-meter resolution. So this is the same plume as what you've seen before, at different days, so the wind has changed. And thanks to this Sentinel-2, we've identified the plume with Sentinel-5, and then with Sentinel-2, we can know exactly where it's coming from. So the main drawback of Sentinel-5P, which we don't really know where it's coming from, it's over. We can see now where it's coming from, and we can see it is coming from this facility with this operator with a very strong degree of certainty. So this has really changed the equation to be able to not only detect, quantify, but attribute these methane leaks. The question is, do we have a lot of these leaks? Again, we don't see all the methane, we have a detection threshold, so how much are we saying? What's in the game today? And the game is 1 gigaton of CO2 equivalent over 80 years, over 20 years. So that's the emission of France and Germany together. So today we can see, detect, quantify, and attribute to the operators methane emission that represent the full emission of France and Germany together. And as I will explain later, all these leaks, most of these leaks, let's say 90% of them, can be eliminated very, very easily. So if you look at the map, you will see that in Europe we have almost no leaks. In spite of the fact that we have a lot of pipeline, you see a lot of leaks around the Russian pipeline. There are lots of leaks also in the US and Canada pipeline. And so we have pipeline in Europe, and we don't have these large leaks. So it's purely based on operational practices. Same in Saudi. There are very few leaks, when it's one of the largest energy producer, and they are leaking almost nothing. In Europe, we have a small leak in Germany coming from a pipeline, and some in Poland from a coal mine, but overall, Europe is pretty clean. So the problem is not really inside EU borders, but it's outside EU borders. This is why these methane import standards are extremely important. So 1 gigaton, and as I mentioned, as you see in the middle, detection of a huge methane leak during the maintenance of a pipeline. And if they had implemented use what you see on the right, which is a portable flying equipment, then this methane would not have gone into the atmosphere. So it's pure operational choices for cost reason that the current practice are a lot of operators prefer to release the methane in the atmosphere rather than to flare it. And if as soon as we see it, which is the case now, then we can insist for the energy that we import that this energy is free from this kind of operational practices. So give you some example. In Algeria, we have a big leak, equivalent of 75 tons per hour, 75 tons per hour of methane, which is equivalent of 1 gigawatt coal-fired power plants at full steam. There's a huge leak here in Iraq, 447 tons per hour, just huge. Here along the Russian pipeline. So there are quite a lot of these leaks in the around Europe that is linked to the energy we import. Same in the US. So you have the shale basin, Permian, Marcellus, but also a lot of releases on pipeline, and you have one at 155 tons per hour that was something like 30 miles south of Chicago. So kind of a bit scary. And we've checked with when we see these leaks, we contact the operators, and in 9 times out of 10, they confirm our quantification. We are very thankful for the EU Commissioner Kadri Simpson to have used our map to support the EU strategy. It's not only because we are proud, and we are indeed proud of that, but it's also because this tool is not a lab tool. It's operational. It's used by our customers to clean their energy system. So it's not something. It's not science fiction. It's not Star Wars. It's working today. The map is updated every day. We can quantify it. It's completely fully automated. So it's something that can be used by regulators and operators already. We've decided to share information with the IEA for the public good, so that there are country-level information, so that the local regulator can start to make a decision on implementing what is required to reduce emissions. And finally, what we are doing with this technology is we are creating the means for responsible energy players to monetize their investment in cleaning their upstream operations. So we are creating statement of origin. We are now doing that for a couple of operators, where we guarantee that the energy that they have produced is free of routine flaring and free of visible methane, so that they can start monetizing their investment in their supply chain and differentiate the molecules they produce from the molecules that are not produced in a way that is responsible. So, as a conclusion, I think we have fantastic assets in Europe. We have satellites, we have innovative company, we have artificial intelligence, we have very strong institutions like the European Parliament, the Commission, the ECB, and we've been able to use the power of this institution when the euro was tanking, and whatever it takes is remembered by all of us. I think we are in a situation where these institutions, in particular the Parliament, can save the planet by sending a very strong message that this kind of emission should not be allowed, and whatever it takes, they should be eliminated. Thank you for your for listening.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rostand. Indeed, during the webinar, the need for innovation, reliable tools, and accurate data came up plenty of times in the discussion. So I'm very thankful for your remarks. Our next speaker is MEP Massimiliano Salini, member of the European Parliament for the EPP Group, and inter alia member of the committees on international trade, on transport and tourism, but also substitute member for the ITRE committee, so the Committee for Industry, Research and Energy. So in an attempt to sum up Mr. Salini's parliamentary work, I think we could very much say that it seeks at seeking a balance between EU industrial competitiveness, but also the transition towards a more sustainable economy. So Mr. Salini, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I appreciate the speech from Mr. Rostand, because I'm also the rapporteur in the space program in the European Parliament, and seeing which kind of result we can have thanks Copernicus and our traditional space program. It's very interesting and useful for me in this final part of the negotiation on the MFF, not so easy negotiation, final negotiation. Well, and I have to thank a lot my colleague Maria Spyraki for inviting me in this particular meeting, very useful for us as a policymaker, because the relationship with industry, with NGOs, with institutions and so on, it's very, very important. It's a pillar for a good work as a policymaker. And I'm also I'm the rapporteur in the energy system integration in ITRE, and also in the hydrogen strategy in the TRAN committee, and I've been confronted more and more with the proposal formulated by the Commission in order to cut as much as possible the emission and succeed in the decarbonization of our economy. To be honest, at the beginning, I was in a critical position with the European Commission about the discussion on the new Green Deal, because as a member from last mandate, I was involved in the clean energy package, and this new Green Deal appeared to reopen the discussion even before starting to implement the new measures. Often we have this particular approach within the European Parliament and in the European institution. Often we change very quickly our targets, and after this change, we decide to start with the impact assessment, but in the reality, normally the situation is quite different. Before we have the impact assessment, and then we can define a new target. I hope that in the future we can change the paradigm, the approach, also in politics. Now we have to raise the neutrality, carbon neutrality by 2050, and to raise this result, we need to change the paradigm, and it's not so easy. Instead of revolution, I prefer the word transition normally in my approach, and in this process of transition, gas is a key. Not only because it allows to reduce the overall greenhouse gas emissions, but also because it allows to do it in the most cost-efficient way. This is one of the pillar for me and for the EPP group in this discussion. The Commission insists in putting at the core of its proposal the energy efficiency first principle. I personally acknowledge the importance of energy efficiency. However, I truly believe that decarbonization should be done at the lowest cost possible and following the principle of technology neutrality. In order to address the problem of methane leakage, we need a clear classification of gas carriers in order to be able to make clear distinction between renewable, decarbonized, and low carbon gases, including hydrogen. A comprehensive classification is of the utmost importance, as well as a strong international cooperation with our neighbors when it comes to hydrogen. We need common definition and standards in order to be able to quantify in a correct way the overall emissions from each unit of hydrogen, as well as sustainability criteria to apply an international level to each important of this energy. At the same time, we have to prefer, I think, a domestic hydrogen production. The import of hydrogen from third countries should be considered at the last stance, and only once international sustainability criteria is established. Research and innovation in this field need to be fostered. We have many tools at our disposal to enhance the role of the carbon capture technologies. The pathway for decarbonizing the European economy has been set, and our union has the opportunity to become a leader in this technology. And also hearing your speeches, I have to remember to me and to us that we should not waste this possibility to be the leader in this technology. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Salini, for your intervention. Judging by the messages received in the chat box, but also from the questions received by the audience, I guess that today's participants, but also speakers, cannot wait for the Q&A session to follow. So on this note, I would like to yield the floor back to Ms. Poppy Kalesi on behalf of EDF for moderating the discussion to follow, as well as for providing the closing remarks at the end of the webinar. Once again, thank you very much. Ms. Kalesi, you have the floor.
Thank you all very much for these really rich insights. You have managed to bring very different angles to the conversation, and I think for the very first time, I personally have a clearer idea of how we all collectively think about energy systems and the energy systems we want to have in the future. I have a series of questions, starting perhaps from one question to the MEPs, Ms. Spyraki and Mr. Salini. how do you understand system integration? And in your opinion, what does energy transition mean? So what are the main, how will you know if you travel in time in 2030, how will you know Europe has succeeded with transition in the energy system in a more decarbonized place? Do we still have Ms. Spyraki and Mr. Salini on the line?
Hello, Bob, it's Elias. I see that Ms. Spyraki has disconnected, but Mr. Salini is indeed in the webinar.
Mr. Salini, are you connected? And would you like me to repeat the question?
I'm sorry, Madam. Can you repeat?
Of course.
Here, and if you can repeat for me, it's the best.
Yes, of course.
Thank you.
I was just I took the impulses from your remarks, and I was hoping to ask you. You said that the transition is preferable to a revolution, and I would like to ask you to go a little bit deeper. If you traveled in time in 2030, how would you know that we have succeeded? What is the picture of success according to you? What is your vision of the transition in 2030? What will Europe have done by that time?
Thank you so much. I'm trying to restart my video. Yeah, thank you so much. But I think that the best tool that we have to raise this kind of result is the neutral approach, because we have a lot of possibility, and we have to merge not only because often we have a vertical approach in Europe, and often we speak about, for example, direct electrification without considering the life cycle assessment in general. And then to raise this result by 2030, we need to merge, to combine different technologies with a neutral approach. For this reason, I spoke about transition and not about revolution, because transition is also a good way to use our technologies, but also considering the cost, the impact as a cost for our citizens. Not forgetting our technologies, but merging different technologies in a correct way. For this reason, I think that in this transition, the gas has a key role. Not because, but because we cannot have about the fossil fuel. We cannot have an obsession on fossil. Our obsession has to be to raise the goal in 10 or 20 years, not now, not forcing our economy, not forcing our development. And for this reason, transition is best, is a good approach, not revolution. In the Green Deal, often, as I said, in the Green Deal, often we have a different approach. For me, the big mistake often is, also in particular for our industries, the big mistake is to define target without an impact assessment. Often we have this the problem in our discussion, and also from my part, because at the beginning of this mandate, the new president suggested the 55% as a target, as a new target, but I worked in the last mandate about 40% as a target. and it's not so easy to change with this rhythm, and not so easy for our entrepreneurs accept this kind of different framework in the time, and this legal framework. And then another tool that we have to raise the result of neutrality, carbon neutrality by 2050, and 55 or 60% as a target by 2030, is to have a legal framework, clear, easy, and not so changing in the time. This is my personal approach.
Thank you very much, Mr. Salini. And may I please ask Ms. Nikrai, can I ask you the same question? What is the picture of success for you in 2030, and how will you know the Commission's vision on system integration and hydrogen has succeeded?
Thank you, Ms. Kalesi. I'm trying to turn on my video. I'm not sure if it's going to work. So I think in the Commission, we have a whole series of key performance indicators that we are looking at when we look at 2030. And of course, one obvious one is that we are discussing and negotiating with member states to have concrete targets for the clean energy transition. And of course, the one way of measuring success is whether Europe collectively manages to achieve those targets. And indeed, as already Honorable Member Salini mentioned, these targets are now shifting and becoming more and more ambitious, because we saw that the climate challenge is not waiting, is not going away, not slowing down. So we have to step up our efforts indeed to go quicker and to bring along our international partners on the same path. So our job is to put in place the policies and the enabling framework that allows member states to take the necessary measures in order to achieve those targets. And of course, within that context, what we said today about methane, and I feel especially encouraged by lots of the things that have been said in today's conference, which are even more optimistic, so giving us even more courage that we can tackle it, and that it will make an even bigger difference than what we have been estimating so far. So that's from my side. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And may I ask the same question to Mr. Rolle? Stefan, what is your picture of success in 2030, and how will you know that you have succeeded with system integration and system decarbonization?
I think this is a very challenging task, and of course, as you may be aware of, we are very progressive on establishing a proper hydrogen strategy in Germany, and we have also tackled the subject during our presidency. And of course, together with other member states and with the European Commission, we do our utmost efforts to reach a very ambitious hydrogen target, and that will help, of course, to reduce all the aims we have set for ourselves, and which has been set not only by the members of Parliament, of the European Parliament in this session, but also of other participators. And so, of course, if we can progress on this way very soon, and if we can reach our ambitions, and I think this will help tremendously to reduce not only methane emissions, but of course also other greenhouse gas emissions, and so we can get close to to the aims which we have set.
Thank you very much. If I may invite Yorgo to answer a question that was initially addressed to Ms. Pavlos, but I think you will probably have the answer to that technical question. The question is from Brendan Devlin from the European Commission. And Brendan is asking, do you know what the global warming potential of hydrogen is?
Yes, we are currently indeed working on that. It has a very low, but it has a global warming potential. And as we are currently adopting more and more hydrogen strategies and seeing more and more figures, we are indeed measuring different effects, because hydrogen becomes a bulk, a volume phenomenon. So we are currently really calculating the effects on global warming, but also the effects on water supply and water cycle, and also salt. So in some regions where we endeavor to have hydrogen production, let's take Morocco, we might need seawater that needs to be desalinated, and water is less of a problem than salt. And these are currently challenges that we are definitely looking into, but I cannot shoot the current figure because we are really running this through our own calculations. But thanks for the question, and thanks for making everybody aware that we need always to keep a balance. But the potential is much lower than, of course, with other gases. And by the way, I would like to also, for us, it's very simple to see the success in 2030, because the hydrogen strategy of the European Commission is so clear in giving clear indicators of success. And that's 10 million ton of renewably produced hydrogen, or 2 times 40 gigawatt electrolyzer capacity enshrined in the strategy. I think an indicator of success would be to go beyond this, but to reach it would also be not bad. Thanks.
Thank you very much for this, Jorgen, and thank you very much for making a clear vision statement. I think this always helps for all of us to get our heads around what we need to be working towards. And perhaps if I can take one more technical question to Antoine. Antoine, this is a question from Axel Wilson. He's asking, would it be possible to give an indicative leaked methane value to most of the natural gas origin the EU is having now? And could you disclose it?
So we have indeed calculated the visible methane intensity of the various exporter of energy to Europe. So where Europe imports its gas. So we've compared Algeria LNG, Algeria pipe with Russian LNG, Russia pipe, and LNG from the Permian basin, so from the US. And I don't have the numbers here in my head, but we've published them in a Bloomberg article, and I think they've been also quoted by the IEA. And we see a large difference between the various sources of energy into Europe. So clearly, we can see differences in the visible methane intensity. Again, it's not all the methane, but it's an indicator of operational stewardship. And clearly, there are improvements that can be done. And by the way, this is what the Biden administration has recognized by taking some very strong steps in terms of regulation. I think the US were missing strong regulation for methane, and thanks to obviously EDF. But the new administration is clearly putting a very ambitious methane target that will certainly rebalance the position of Permian gas versus the other sources of energy from Europe.
Thank you very much, Antoine. That was very helpful. I have a next question to Andreas. Andreas, you offered a very new way of understanding the issue, which I think is is of course the billion-dollar question in terms of strategy development. And you talked about trade-offs, which is a framing I really loved. And what this framing did for me is that it kind of gave a more concrete further development to what I think I heard many speakers talk about today, that we have to take decisions in uncertainty. And both the external and domestic context in Europe remains quite uncertain, but we're all working towards at least finding some no-regret options. And you highlighted one no-regret option, which was to immediately phase out grey hydrogen. What are the other no-regret options that you can see for Europe in the next 5 years?
Yes, thank you, Poppy. So I think this is a conversation that we are still having, unfortunately, as to what those no regrets are. I do, I would underline and concur that one of the no regrets that I think is generally recognized at this point in time is that gray hydrogen, as in fossil gas without CCS, being used to produce hydrogen is extremely polluting, whether one regards methane leakage or not, and is also a relatively low-hanging fruit when it comes to reducing emissions towards the quite ambitious 55% greenhouse gas emissions reduction target. So we can look at this and we can look at the scale of the EU hydrogen strategy and say, I think we're making the right move here to say we need to transition to a greener hydrogen production. We have an EU hydrogen strategy that essentially for just domestic production has a target at the level of current gray hydrogen production. So we have essentially committed to emissions reductions at that scale. And I think that's a strong signal from the EU, and I think that is clearly a no regret. Now, the question is then, in a potentially much bigger hydrogen market, for example, just to stick with the hydrogen example going forward, we know that there will be major potential uses for hydrogen across many different sectors. And there are, for example, some options where there might be arguably an intermediate step. So if we take the example of direct reduction of iron, this is a potential alternative to a blast furnace using coal. It was used as an example earlier today already. If we use natural gas, fossil gas, and use an electric arc furnace in the later step to produce primary steel, we can reduce emissions from gas versus a coal blast furnace process by as much as 2/3. Now, is this 100%? No. Will methane leakage potentially reduce this positive climate effect? Yes. So these are things where I think it goes back into the category of conversations we were having around coal versus gas in the power sector. And I think there will be different strategic approaches here. Either A, no, we have to jump immediately fully to green steel otherwise, and focus all of our attention on this, or we will somehow allow for a regulation that has this intermediate step. My personal position would be to say that we need, we indeed have a lot of different battles we're facing, that we have significant reductions we can achieve through a lot of these technologies that are in line with very high ambition, and where we really have to look at the cumulative emissions from now until 2050. And so I think those are though two different perspectives, and they're somewhat philosophical, they are somewhat strategic, and I hope we have this conversation very seriously in the immediate future, because I think some of those conversations have to be made or had so that we can actually put in place regulatory frameworks so that we have any emissions reductions.
Thank you very, very much for this framing, Andreas. This gives a lot more food for thought, I think, and I'm very much looking forward to engaging in this conversation more. We still have 5 minutes, and I would like to very quickly take 2 more questions. The first one is from Mr. Amanatidis to Antoine Rostand. Antoine, is it possible with satellite measurements to detect methane emissions from other sources apart from big industrial installations? For example, tropical landfills, biomass burning, or even from permafrost?
Okay, so today the detection threshold of satellite imagery is going, is dropping quickly. Once EDF has its methane sat, it will go probably, in the hundreds of kilo per hour, which is 1 order of magnitude better than now. Today we are around 5 tons per hour, but this enables you, when you do averaging, to see landfills, to see methane also from marshlands. So we have among our detection, probably 2/3 are coming from the energy system, so coal, oil and gas, production of oil and gas transportation, and the rest are different sources. So we clearly see other type of sources, but let's say, a lot come from the energy infrastructure, because, this is where you have concentration. But the good news is that clearly the detection threshold are going down. You have a lot of satellite that can see methane, and obviously we have new assets, space assets that will be launched very soon. So the idea, I think, is to start educating investors, companies, the general public, and regulators to use satellite imagery with what we have today. We have a lot. It's not perfect, but we already have something. And the idea is, let's get used to that. Let's see what works. Is a statement of origin working or not? You see, to guarantee of, we have something. It's significant. It's 1 gigaton that we can eliminate in terms of carbon budget. It's huge. So let's start. There is no reason to wait, and then we will improve with time.
Thank you very much, Antoine. And one last question, which I don't actually know anyone having the answer, please just take the floor. Gavin Allwright is asking, could DNA tag tracing of methane be used for tracing producers, blockchain use, etc.? So it's a question on traceability.
The way we want to trace is to do like the market for electricity, where you separate the guarantee of origin from the electron itself, because you cannot track electron. And our view is that we cannot track the molecules themselves, even though you can, but then they are mixed in the gas system. And the idea is to separate, if you produce a volume of energy, 1 terajoule, then you can guarantee that this terajoule is free of methane, flaring, or whatever. And then this certificate can be sold in the market. So you create a market for clean energy that is disconnected from the molecule, but you make sure that this terajoule is sold only once. So you need something with blockchain. There are secure registry to do that, which are probably better than blockchain. But yes, first, obviously you need to have a secure registry.
Possibly just to add that the STOA committee of the European Parliament has today discussed, I think in the Inter committee, they discussed a study on that has been performed by STOA. The impact would be quite high on clean energy in general, not just on methane leakage, but as you just described. However, the maturity is not high enough at the moment. That's what I heard in this hearing. But we need to accelerate, because it makes sense. Europe could be a front runner here as well in using distributed ledger technologies or blockchain in this respect. Thank you.
Thank you very much both for sharing. This we only have 1 minute, and I think the easiest way to summarize such a rich conversation with so much knowledge is reflecting about where we have come collectively in Europe as a knowledge community within the last 2 years. And I would say, with the exception of the Commission, who have been looking at this issue for the past 4 years in great detail and depth, for most of us, the issue of methane emissions has been quite new, and it's been a very steep learning curve. What I'm really encouraged and heartened to say and see today is that, yes, this is an uncertain issue. System energy transition and integration is quite uncertain in some ways, but I'm extremely heartened to see that over the past 2 years, the common European way to come out of this and move fast has been knowledge production and technology production and innovation. And looking back at 2 years ago, when most of us knew nothing about methane emissions, what I see around the table is, our MEPs across parties actually have very detailed, very substantiated opinions and views on, which direction we ought to be taking as a region. We are looking at the German presidency and Germany as a country, taking the issue really seriously and making sure that all member states are actually climbing the learning curve as fast as possible, and this is commendable. I was very pleased to hear that Germany is actually doing their own measurements. This is absolutely fantastic, and we will cover an important knowledge gap not too long from now. And we also heard, the innovation side of things. We heard from yours today the ambition of the hydrogen industry, which is in some ways an emerging industry, but in some ways it's already kind of a scale up. And the level of ambition and optimism is like nothing we've ever seen before on hydrogen and fuel cells. So it's going to be a very exciting 10 years ahead. And of course, the important strategic decisions that Andreas brought and the new tools and frameworks in understanding, it is very hard to take decisions in a flux, but decisions we are taking, and there's always going to be trade-offs and there's always going to be uncertainties. But as well, there's also ways to move forward towards the KPIs that Kitty Midwife from the Commission has explained to us, which is precisely, that looking in 2030, the best way we all have to succeed is to know if we've met the targets we've set. And I leave you with these parting thoughts. What seems common in the way we operate in Europe is that we are driven by targets. And what I heard today is that most of us are actually driven by not only meeting these targets, but also exceeding them. And this is an extremely optimistic message to leave you with. Thank you all very much for your very important insights and for the optimism you brought to the debates. I'm really glad to see the level of ambition and urgency. And most importantly, I'm really pleased to see the track record and how far we've all collectively come in terms of knowledge on such a complex issue within not more than 2 years. So be proud of what you've all achieved, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Kalesi, for moderating the Q&As, but also for wrapping up today's discussion. Once more, I would like to take the opportunity to thank hosting and participating MEPs, Ms. Nitrai on behalf of the European Commission, as well as our excellent set of speakers for today. Last but not least, I would also like to thank on behalf of the European Parliament Intergroup, our audience for today. It's been a real pleasure having this event with you today. So very much looking forward to the ones to follow. Until then, from all of us at the Parliament Intergroup, all the best and stay safe. Thank you very much.